She was sold with a baby in her arms. The vampire said, "I'll be father and husband both." The marketplace was alive with sound, yet it felt hollow to Alara. Children ran past shouting. Merchants pounded their stalls with urgency, and the scent of roasted meat and damp hay clung to the air. But for Alara, none of it mattered. Her eyes, dark and haunted, stayed fixed on the narrow path ahead. In her arms, her baby slept, swaddled in a worn blanket, completely unaware of the danger that stalked their world. Ever since her family's fortunes had crumbled, the weight of survival had fallen squarely on her shoulders. The debts her father had left unpaid had marked her life with a cruel chain. Every step she took was measured, every word she spoke cautious. Yet even in this crowded square she could not shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her. The whispers began softly at first, almost like the rustling of leaves, but they grew louder with every step she took. "The vampire lord seeks a child's mother," a hushed voice said. "She carries the blood of the past. She will be his." Alara's grip on her child tightened instinctively. She had heard stories about Kale, the vampire lord who ruled the northern province. He was immortal, cold, and feared. Kings and queens had bowed to him. Armies had hesitated at the mere mention of his name, and yet here she was, walking among people who whispered his legend like a prayer and a curse all at once. She tried to blend in, sliding past the wooden stalls with a grace that came only from desperation. But fate is rarely kind, and shadows are rarely empty. "Step aside," a voice called, sharp and commanding. Alara froze, her heart beating like a drum in her chest. When she looked up, she saw him. He stood taller than any man she had ever known, dressed in black that seemed to drink in the light around him. His hair was dark as midnight, and his eyes glowed faintly with a strange, haunting amber hue. The air around him was cold, yet strangely intoxicating, like the calm before a storm. Kale, the vampire lord, had found her. "I am told you are for sale," he said, his voice low, smooth, and edged with authority. "And you carry something precious." His gaze fell on the child, and for a moment Alara felt as if the world had stilled. I am not," she began, but the words faltered on her lips. There was a power in him that made defiance almost meaningless. Kale stepped closer, and the crowd seemed to part for him as if the air itself respected his presence. "I will be honest," he said, his eyes never leaving the baby. "I will be father and husband both. You will have nothing to fear under my protection, if you choose to accept it." Alara's breath caught. Husband and father. Words that should have felt like warmth instead cut her like ice. Fear battled with confusion, and somewhere deep inside, an unexpected flutter of hope dared to rise. Why would you care for me or my child?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am nothing. We are nothing." Kale's gaze softened for the briefest of moments. "Nothing?" he repeated, as if testing the word on his tongue. "I have lived centuries as nothing. Perhaps you and your child are my first chance at something real." Alara did not understand. How could a creature of darkness, immortal, feared, untouchable, speak to her with such tenderness beneath the weight of threat? She wanted to pull away, to escape, yet something in his presence made her roots feel as if they were growing into the earth itself. Before she could respond, a servant approached hurriedly. "My lord, we have prepared the carriage." She cannot leave the market alone. There are dangers. Kale's eyes flit to her, sharp and calculating. "It seems the world conspires to force your hand," he said softly. Then he reached out, and though Alara wanted to pull back, she could not. His hand was cold, almost impossibly so, but it did not feel cruel. It felt necessary. The journey to Kale's estate was shrouded in a fog that seemed unnatural. Alara sat stiffly in the carriage, the baby nestled against her chest, while Kale remained silent, his eyes fixed on the passing trees and shadowed hills. Despite the cold that clung to him, the warmth of the carriage lantern fell on her face, and she could not help but wonder if he truly was as merciless as the stories claimed. Finally, the carriage stopped before a towering black castle. Its spires pierced the clouds, and the walls seemed to hum with an unseen power. The air was sharp with magic, the kind that made the skin prickle and the heart pound. Cale dismounted and helped her down, his hand steady and firm. The baby stirred but did not cry, as if recognizing the safety, or at least the power, in Cale's presence. Inside, the castle was even more imposing. Crimson torches lined the hallways, casting shadows that danced like spirits along the stone walls. Servants and creatures of unknown origin watched silently from the corners, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Elara's pulse quickened. This was not a home. It was a fortress of legends and whispers. Cale led her to a room that overlooked the northern cliffs, where moonlight spilled over jagged rocks and endless forests. "This will be your home," he said, finally breaking the silence. "You and your child will be safe here. But understand, this is not a gentle world. You must learn its rules, and I will teach you." Elara swallowed, torn between fear and relief. "Rules? What rules?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Survival," he replied simply. "Loyalty, strength, and trust. You will find all three are necessary here. For you, for your child, and for me." The weight of his words settled in her chest like a stone. She wanted to run, to flee from the power that radiated from him, yet the thought of leaving her child unprotected made her heart clench painfully. She was trapped between fear and hope, a precarious balance she had never known before. Night fell, and Cale disappeared into the shadows of the castle, leaving her alone with the child. The room was silent except for the soft breathing of the baby. Yet even in this quiet, Elara could feel eyes upon her. She shivered and wrapped herself tightly around her child, whispering promises she hoped she could keep. Then in the stillness she heard it, a soft, almost tender whisper, carried on the wind from the direction of the hall. "I will not let them fall to the darkness I bear." Elara's heart froze. The words were not meant for her, yet they pierced her soul. She did not understand how a creature of darkness could speak of protection, of care, in a voice that was both commanding and gentle. And yet, she could not deny the strange sense of safety that settled over her, thin as it was, like a fragile shield against the night. She spent the hours of that night staring at the moonlit horizon, her mind racing. Could she trust him? Could a vampire truly care for her and her child? Fear warred with longing, and exhaustion tugged at her limbs, but sleep would not come. At dawn, the castle was alive with movement. Cale returned, his presence as sharp and undeniable as ever. "Come," he said. "There is much to teach you. The world is not kind to those without strength, and you will need every ounce of it." Elara nodded, though her heart trembled. She knew, deep in her bones, that her life had changed forever. The chains of fate were no longer only around her wrists. They were entwined with the darkness of a creature centuries old, and the fragile hope of her child's future. As she followed him into the hall, the baby's small hand reached for Cale instinctively. The vampire's eyes softened once more, a flicker of something almost human in their depth. Elara could not yet name it, but she knew it was dangerous. Not the kind of danger that could harm her physically, but the kind that could change her heart. And for the first time in many years, she felt the stirrings of a strange, impossible question. Could a creature of darkness truly offer the light she had been searching for? The castle doors closed behind them with a thunderous echo, and Elara realized there was no turning back. Her life, and her child's, were now bound to the vampire lord. And somewhere in the shadows, Cale watched her with eyes that held both a warning and a promise. The story had begun, and the night was far from over. The castle breathed around Elara like a living, ancient being. Every hallway whispered secrets, and the torches flickered, as if acknowledging her presence. Though Cale had promised safety, the weight of the castle's shadows pressed upon her chest. She held her child closer, feeling the soft warmth of the baby against her. The child's eyes opened briefly, staring at the dim light, and then blinking sleepily. Elara had never felt so small, so fragile, yet she could not show it. Not here. Not with the eyes of the castle upon her. Cale walked beside her, tall and unyielding, his cloak brushing the stone floor. He did not speak, but the presence of him was enough. She had spent the morning observing him in silence, noting the way his eyes swept the corridors with a predator's precision, yet softened every time they landed on her or the child. It was unsettling. A creature feared by kings and knights showing tenderness. Something in her heart stirred, and she didn't understand why. "This will be your chamber," Cale said finally, stopping before a door carved from dark wood, inlaid with silver sigils that seemed to glow faintly. "You will rest here. You will eat when food is offered, and you will learn the rules of this house. There are servants and beings in this castle who obey me, but not all of them are kind. Do not anger them. Do not trust them blindly. And above all, do not make yourself vulnerable without reason."
Alara nodded, clutching the child.
She wanted to ask questions, hundreds of them, but her throat was tight with caution. Instead, she entered the room. The space was modest compared to the rest of the castle, with high ceilings and a bed draped in dark velvet. Moonlight spilled through tall windows, illuminating the dust in the corners, revealing the age and power in every stone. Cale lingered at the door, watching her carefully. "Sleep will come easier once you understand the house," he said softly. His voice was commanding, yet there was a quiet patience beneath it. "Come morning, I will show you the rest. For now, settle in." Alara nodded again. He left without another word, and the door clicked closed behind him. She stood in the quiet, the baby stirring slightly, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. But even in that brief pause, unease coiled in her chest. The castle was alive, yes, but alive in a way that she could feel in her bones. Every shadow seemed to move just slightly when she wasn't looking. Every draft whispered across her skin like a warning. As she sat on the edge of the bed, she heard the softest footsteps outside the door. Her heart jumped. She pressed herself against the wall, holding the child protectively. The door opened slowly, revealing a servant she had not noticed before. She was tall, thin, with pale skin and eyes that glowed faintly like embers. "You are Elara, mother of the child?" the servant asked. The voice was low, melodic, but carried an edge of authority. "I am here to guide you. My name is Silas. Follow me." Elara hesitated but nodded. Silas's presence was both reassuring and unnerving, like a shadow she could not escape. She wrapped her child tighter and followed down a hall lined with portraits of people she did not recognize. Their eyes seemed to watch her, some almost alive, their gazes heavy with judgment. "This castle," Elara began. "It is enormous." How do you keep track of it all?" Silas's lips curved in a faint smile. "We do not merely keep track. The castle watches itself. It responds to the power within it. Cale is not only its master, he is part of it." His eyes flicked briefly toward her, amber and knowing. "You will see soon enough, and you will learn your place." Elara shivered, but did not speak. The words felt heavy. Place. Power. Rules. She had been used to fighting for survival, but this was a different kind of survival, one that required caution, strategy, and perhaps even trust in a being she barely understood. They stopped before a long hallway lined with doors. Silas gestured to one. "This is where meals are prepared. That is the training room. You will see Cale's library soon. Everything here has purpose." Alara's mind reeled. Training room? Library? Meals prepared? She had expected confinement, not order. Silas seemed to sense her confusion. "Do not mistake kindness for weakness," Silas said softly. "Cale's protection is absolute, but it is not gentle. He will test you. He will test your limits. And he will expect loyalty. Learn that now, or it will cost you." Alara clenched her fists, her determination hardening. She did not like being told what to do, but the truth was undeniable. She had no choice. Here, in this castle of shadows and whispers, she was vulnerable, and she had a child to protect. Survival meant listening. Survival meant learning. Survival meant, perhaps, understanding the vampire who had taken them in. The days passed in a rhythm that was at once strange and terrifying. Cale maintained a presence that was everywhere and nowhere at once. He did not sleep, or if he did, it was only briefly. He watched the comings and goings of the castle, a silent predator ensuring order and obedience. And yet, in the small moments, he showed a side that the world did not see. A soft hand on the child's forehead, a word of advice to Elara when she faltered, a glance that carried meaning beyond words. Elara found herself struggling with conflicting emotions. Fear, yes, he was a vampire, a being of immense power, but also a strange fascination. She had never met anyone like him, and though she would not admit it even to herself, part of her began to feel drawn. Not by his strength alone, but by the hints of humanity that flickered beneath centuries of darkness. One evening Cale approached her chamber without announcement. Elara froze, clutching her child, unsure of what he intended. He stopped at the threshold, his eyes scanning her face, then softened. "You have done well," he said quietly. "The child, you care for it fiercely. That is good. But you must care for yourself as well. The world beyond these walls is not as forgiving as you imagine." Elara's lips parted in surprise. You think I am doing well?" she asked. Her voice was hesitant, unsure if she had heard correctly. Cale nodded once, curtly. "You survive. You learn. You protect the child. That is acceptable." His eyes lingered on her, a question unspoken hanging in the air. "Do not mistake my words for softness. I do not give praise lightly. But neither do I ignore courage where it exists." For a moment, she felt a strange warmth, like sunlight on her skin, and then it was gone. Cale turned, his cloak brushing the floor as he disappeared into the hall. Elara exhaled, heart racing. The smallest hint of connection had appeared, only to vanish, leaving her with longing and confusion. The nights were the hardest. The castle seemed alive with whispers, shadows that moved when she was not looking. The child sometimes stirred and cried, and she would find Cale already present, holding the baby gently, almost reverently, until the cry ceased. Each time Elara felt a strange mix of gratitude, fear, and something deeper she could not name. One night, drawn by a need she could not explain, Elara wandered the halls with the child, seeking answers, or perhaps comfort. She found herself in a high tower overlooking the forest. The moonlight spilled through the windows, casting silver on the stone floors. The wind whispered in the trees below, carrying a chill that seemed to reach into her bones. Cale appeared silently beside her. "You wonder," he said. Not a question, but a statement, as if he had always known she would. Elara clutched the child, startled. I could not sleep," she admitted. "The castle, it feels alive, and I am not sure what to trust." Cale's gaze swept across the horizon. "The castle is alive because it is tied to me, and I am tied to it. It will test you, as I will. But tests are not always cruel. Some are necessary to survive what lies beyond these walls." She studied him, searching for any sign of threat in his expression. Instead, she saw concern, a rare flicker of vulnerability beneath the centuries of control. "Why do you care for us?" she asked, almost whispering. "Why for me? Why for the child?" Cale's eyes softened, and he did not answer immediately. The wind rustled through the tower, carrying leaves and the scent of the distant forest. Finally he spoke, low and almost tender. I do not know why I dare. Perhaps it is because in you I see something I lost long ago. Perhaps it is because for once I am not alone." Elara's heart trembled. To hear a creature of darkness speak of loneliness was almost unbearable. Fear warred with fascination and an unfamiliar stirring of hope. But even as she looked at him, part of her recoiled. She could not forget he was a vampire, a being centuries old, powerful and dangerous. Suddenly, a sound from the hall startled them both. A servant hurried past, whispering urgently to Cale, who tensed immediately. The moment of connection shattered. Cale's gaze hardened, his hand brushing briefly against her shoulder, not harshly, but with a warning. "Come," he said. "There are matters that require my attention. You and the child will remain here. You must rest." Alara watched him leave, a storm of emotions churning inside her. She held the child close and whispered softly, "What am I to make of this? This man, this castle, this life?" Outside, the wind howled through the towers, carrying whispers of ancient power and unseen eyes, and Alara realized with a mix of dread and fascination that she was already entangled in a fate she could not escape. Somewhere deep in the castle, Cale paused, watching the distant horizon. His amber eyes glimmered in the torchlight, a mixture of vigilance, longing, and a shadow of guilt centuries old. And as the night deepened, Alara could not shake the sense that the castle, and the vampire lord who ruled it, was watching her back, waiting for her to understand the rules of their new shared life. The House of Shadows was alive, and it had only just begun its lessons. The forest beyond the northern cliffs had always been whispered about in fearful tales. They said the trees were ancient, older than kingdoms, and that shadows moved in ways no mortal eye could follow. On this night the whispers felt real. The wind carried a chill that gnawed at the bones, and the silver moon hung high, illuminating the forest with a pale, cold light. Alara stood at the edge of the castle grounds, holding her child close, her heart thrumming in her chest. Something was wrong. The air was thick with tension, like the calm before a storm, and she could feel it in her bones. Cale approached silently from behind, his presence a mix of command and reassurance. "You feel it too," he said, almost as if speaking to her thoughts. His amber eyes glimmered in the moonlight. "The curse, it stirs again. I had hoped it would remain dormant, but it awakens tonight." Alara tightened her grip on the child. "A curse? What curse?" she asked, voice trembling. Cale's gaze swept over the forest, scanning the shadows as if expecting them to move. "Long ago, a mistake tied my bloodline to a dark magic. It sleeps for decades, sometimes centuries, but when it awakens, it seeks what I hold most dear. That includes your child." Her stomach turned cold. "My child," she whispered, holding the small bundle closer. Why would it care about my child?" Cale's expression softened, almost unbearably. "Because the child carries the hope I cannot have alone. The magic seeks to extinguish it to test whether I can truly protect what I love. And now, the test begins." Alara wanted to protest, wanted to flee back into the castle where she felt some semblance of safety, but Cale took her hand firmly. The cold of his skin startled her, but the strength in his grip reassured her. "Stay close," he said. "Do not let fear control you. Fear will weaken you faster than any curse." Together they stepped into the forest, shadows stretching long beneath the silver light. The child nestled against Alara, cooing softly, unaware of the danger surrounding them. The forest seemed alive, the trees whispering secrets in a language she could not understand. Every crack of a branch made her heart leap. Every rustle of leaves made her pulse quicken. Suddenly the wind shifted, and a dark figure emerged between the trees. Its eyes glowed with a deep crimson light, and its shape moved with unnatural grace. Alara froze, clutching the child, while Cale's stance became rigid, protective. "It is here," Cale said, voice low and dangerous. "Do not look away. Do not falter." The figure approached, a shadow made solid, and Alara felt a cold that went beyond the night air. She wanted to run, to shield her child, but Cale stepped forward, placing himself between her and the darkness. His presence radiated strength and power, a shield that seemed to push back the shadows. "Leave them," Cale commanded, his voice echoing with authority that carried centuries of command. You will not take what is mine. The shadow paused, almost studying him, before lunging forward. Kale moved like a predator, his speed inhuman, his strength terrifying. He caught the shadow before it could reach Elara, his amber eyes glowing brighter as he drew on power that made the air shimmer around him. The shadow hissed, recoiling, then vanished into the trees with a sound like a sigh of frustration. Elara exhaled shakily, her legs trembling. What was that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Kale turned to her, and for a moment she saw something rare in his expression. Fear, not for himself, but for her and the child. "That is the curse," he said simply. "It tests me, challenges me. And sometimes it tries to break me." Elara wanted to speak, to ask how she could help, how she could fight alongside him, but the words died in her throat. The fear and awe tangled together in her chest, making it impossible to form a coherent thought. She could only stand there, holding the child, feeling the pull of something she did not fully understand. "Kale," she whispered, hesitant. "Why? Why do you care so much? Why for us?" Kale's gaze softened, the amber warmth melting into something almost human. "Because I have lived centuries in darkness," he said quietly. "I have taken, I have conquered, I have ruled. And yet I have never felt responsibility like this. I have never felt the need to protect something so completely, so utterly." Valera's heart stirred. The words were unexpected, almost impossible. She had feared him, hated the thought of being bound to a vampire lord, yet here he was, exposing a vulnerability centuries in the making. I don't know if I can trust that," she admitted. Kale's hand brushed against hers, gentle but commanding. "Trust is not given lightly," he said. "It must be earned. And so it is with us with the child. I will prove it to you. But first, you must survive this night." The forest seemed to close in around them, shadows lengthening and twisting, whispering threats only they could hear. The curse was not just a test. It was alive, almost sentient, probing for weakness. Elara felt her courage falter, her fear threatening to overwhelm her. Kale noticed immediately. He pulled her close, one arm around her shoulders, the other keeping the child safe. "Do not let it control you," he whispered. "Focus on what you can do. Focus on what you protect. Fear is a weapon, and I will not allow it to harm you." They moved through the forest cautiously, each step measured, each sound noted. The curse seemed to respond, moving with them, testing them, whispering doubts into their minds. Elara felt the weight of it, the pressure to fail, the temptation to let panic take over. But Kale's presence was a constant, grounding her, reminding her that she was not alone. Hours passed like this, tension tightening around them like a vice. And then, as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the curse made its final attempt. A shadow lunged from the trees, faster and more violent than before. Elara stumbled, fear threatening to paralyze her. Kale moved instantly, catching the shadow with a strength that made the ground quake beneath them. The amber glow in his eyes flared, and he let out a command that resonated through the forest, shaking leaves from the trees and scattering the shadows. The curse screamed, then vanished, leaving a silence that was almost deafening. Elara fell to her knees, holding her child tightly. The fear that had gripped her chest for hours dissolved into exhaustion, awe, and relief. She looked at Kale, who stood nearby, his expression unreadable, but she could see the strain in his posture. The curse had tested him as well, and though he had triumphed, it had not left him unmarked.
Are you...
"Are you all right?" she asked softly, fear giving way to concern. Kale's amber eyes met hers, and for the first time there was no mask of power, no barrier of control. He looked human, vulnerable, exhausted. "I am stronger than it anticipated," he said quietly. "But I would not lie. I am tired. The curse takes more than strength. It takes patience, focus, and perhaps something more." Elara realized then that he had fought not just for himself, but for her And the child. For them, he had risked everything, exposing a part of himself that he had hidden for centuries. The thought struck her deeply, stirring emotions she could not yet name. Why for us? She asked again, her voice trembling. Why care at all? Cale approached, kneeling beside her, careful not to startle the child. Because I have never known something so fragile, so precious, that I could not bear to lose it, he said quietly. You and this child, you are hope. And perhaps hope is what I have been searching for all this time. Elara felt a lump rise in her throat. The words were so simple, yet carried the weight of centuries. She had feared him, hated him, perhaps even despised the thought of being bound to a vampire lord. But in that moment she understood something she could not deny. He was not just a creature of darkness. He was capable of care, of love, of sacrifice. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to tell him that she understood, that she trusted him. But before she could, Cale's gaze flicked toward the horizon. We are not yet safe, he said, his voice low and tense. The curse is gone, for now, but it will return. And next time it may not test me alone. Elara's heart clenched. She realized then that their bond was not just forged in comfort or trust. It was forged in danger, fear, and survival. The path ahead would demand courage, patience, and perhaps a willingness to face emotions neither of them fully understood. As the sun rose over the northern cliffs, casting light on the twisted trees and dark soil, Elara knew one truth with certainty. She was no longer merely a mother seeking safety. She was part of a story far larger, bound to a vampire lord who was both her protector and a mystery she had yet to unravel. Cale watched the sunrise silently, amber eyes glimmering with unspoken thoughts. For centuries he had ruled, feared, and endured. But in Elara's presence, in the protection of her child, he had begun something new, a path toward redemption perhaps, and certainly toward a bond that neither time nor darkness could easily sever. The forest whispered, the wind carried secrets, and the world beyond the castle seemed to pulse with challenges yet to come. And somewhere deep in his heart, Cale knew that the trials were far from over. The night had tested them, but the dawn only marked the beginning of a journey neither could fully control. The castle lay quiet under the first light of dawn. Even the shadows seemed to pause as if holding their breath. Cale stood on the balcony of the northern tower, gazing at the forest below where the curse had stirred only hours before. His amber eyes glimmered with thoughts he could not voice, a storm of fear, hope, and unspoken emotion raging behind them. Elara approached quietly, her child cradled safely in her arms. She hesitated before speaking. Cale. The forest, the curse. It may return, but we survived. Together. Her voice trembled, not from fear but from the weight of all they had endured. Cale turned toward her, his expression unreadable, yet something softer shone in his gaze. Survival alone is not enough, he said. It is not enough to simply endure. We must be ready for what comes next, for the forces that seek to undo us. And he paused, glancing at the child. I cannot do it alone. Elara felt her chest tighten. She had seen Cale's strength, his immortality, and his mastery over shadows. Yet here he was, admitting need, and honesty centuries in the making. Then we will not be alone, she whispered, feeling warmth in the words. A bridge across the gulf of fear and uncertainty that had defined their relationship from the start. The morning air was cold, carrying the scent of dew and pine. But within the castle, a fire seemed to burn between them, a fragile yet unbreakable bond forged through danger, fear, and shared responsibility. The child stirred and reached for Cale instinctively. For a moment the centuries of darkness seemed to melt away, leaving only the simplest truth, family. Cale knelt, taking the child gently, his amber eyes softening as he studied the tiny face. You are precious, he whispered. I will protect you as I have never protected anything before. Elara watched him, her emotions tangled. Fear had brought them together, survival had tested them, and now something else, something tender and profound, was blooming. She wanted to speak, to express the gratitude, fear, and strange longing that had built inside her, but words failed her. Instead, she simply nodded, trusting the bond that had grown through every shadowed night and every test of courage. Later that day, Kael led her to the castle library, a vast room of ancient knowledge and forgotten magic. Scrolls, books, and artifacts lined the shelves, some glowing faintly, others whispering secrets only he could hear. Here he began to teach her, not lessons of combat, but lessons of understanding. How to read the signs of magic, how to recognize danger before it struck, how to navigate a world where darkness was as common as light. Elara absorbed the lessons with determination. Her child slept quietly in a cradle nearby, watched over by Kael, whose gaze flickered between the texts and the sleeping infant, with a careful, almost reverent attention. Each lesson strengthened her, not only in skill, but in confidence. She was learning not merely to survive, but to stand beside the vampire lord as a partner, not a pawn. Days turned into weeks. The castle, once a place of shadows and fear, began to feel like a home, not for the grandeur of its halls nor the power it represented, but because of the fragile, unspoken bond growing between them. Kael's presence, once terrifying, had become a source of quiet comfort, and Elara, who had feared his darkness, began to see the light beneath it. But peace is never without challenge. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the western cliffs, a disturbance rippled through the castle. A distant howl echoed from the forest, carrying with it a magic older and darker than even Kael had faced. The shadows deepened, stretching across the walls and halls like tendrils of ink. Kael's expression darkened. The curse, it is not gone. It waits, stronger than before. And now it tests us both, not only me but you, and the child as well. Alara's heart raced. She had learned to trust him, to rely on his protection, yet fear still clung like a shadow. "What can we do?" she asked. Kael placed a hand over hers. "We fight together. The curse cannot take what we protect as one. It tests not our strength alone, but our unity. And we will show it that we are not broken, that our bond cannot be undone." Night fell, thick and heavy. The castle seemed alive with anticipation, every corridor a potential threat, every shadow a reminder of the darkness waiting outside. Elara prepared herself, not as a victim but as a mother and protector, standing beside the vampire who had once been her fear and now her unexpected ally. The forest stirred first. Shadows began to gather at its edge, coalescing into forms that twisted and shifted, dark shapes that seemed almost alive. Elara clutched her child tightly, feeling the tiny heartbeat against her chest. Kael stepped forward, a figure of command and power, his presence a shield against the night. The curse approached, probing, testing, seeking weakness. And Kael, drawing on centuries of power and wisdom, countered it with strategy, precision, and raw strength. But this time, he did not fight alone. Elara, guided by his teachings, channeled a protective charm she had learned, a light of hope woven into words, a simple spell powered by love and determination. Together, they faced the darkness. Kael's strength met the curse's aggression. Elara's resolve wove a shield of protection, and the child, innocently pure, became a symbol of the hope the curse sought to destroy but could not. Hours passed in tense struggle. Shadows recoiled, advanced, twisted, and shattered under the combined force of Kael and Elara. And when the first light of dawn broke through the horizon, the curse was gone, dissolved not by force alone, but by unity, courage, and the unbreakable bond forged in fire and shadow. Elara fell to her knees, exhausted but victorious, holding her child. Kael knelt beside her, his hand brushing her hair, his amber eyes reflecting relief, admiration, and a quiet joy he had not felt in centuries. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it together." Elara looked at him, seeing not the fearsome vampire lord who had taken them in, but the man beneath, capable of care, tenderness, and love. "Together," she echoed, a smile trembling on her lips. The castle, once a place of shadows and whispers, felt alive with warmth. The halls no longer seemed oppressive. the corridors no longer threatening. The bond between them, forged in fear and tempered in courage, had transformed the very air they breathed. Days later, as the forest outside returned to quiet, Kyle took Alara and the child to the balcony overlooking the northern cliffs. The sun rose, painting the sky in gold and rose, casting light over the castle and the land beyond. Kale held the child gently, amber eyes reflecting the rising sun. "This life," he said quietly, "is not perfect. Darkness may return, danger may follow. But we have learned what matters. We are bound not by fear, not by power, but by choice, by care, and by hope." Elara stood beside him, feeling the warmth of his words. "I never thought I would find safety, or even trust in a place like this," she admitted. "But I see now it is not just a place. It is us, together. And that is what keeps the darkness at bay." Kale smiled, a rare, genuine expression that lit his features.
"You are stronger than you know, Elara."
"You have taught me what I have forgotten, that even a creature of darkness can find redemption, that love and courage can heal centuries of solitude." The child cooed, reaching for both of them, a simple, perfect symbol of the bond that had saved them. Elara and Kale exchanged a glance, unspoken promises passing between them. The castle had witnessed their fear, their struggle, and their growth. It had tested them, and in the end, they had emerged stronger, united, and transformed. Kale turned to Alara, his voice low and intimate, carrying the weight of centuries and the light of newfound hope. "In your arms, in your care, I have found what eternity lacked, and I vow as long as I live to guard it, to cherish it, and to never let it fade." Alara's heart trembled, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something more, an emotion she had not expected to feel for a creature of darkness. "And I," she said softly, "will stand beside you, always, for the child, for us, for the life we choose together." The sun climbed higher, spilling light over the cliffs and the castle, chasing away the lingering shadows. The forest was calm, the wind gentle, carrying with it the scent of hope, renewal, and the promise of a future neither of them could have imagined before. Yet even in the light, they knew the world beyond their walls was unpredictable, and darkness could return at any time. But for now, in this moment, they were free. Free from fear, free from the curse. And bound together by trust, courage, and a bond forged in fire and shadow. A family chosen, not given, and stronger for it. Kale lifted the child higher, the sunlight glinting off his amber eyes. "No darkness can undo this," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "We are stronger than the night, stronger than fear, and bound by more than life itself." Elara rested her hand on his arm, feeling the warmth beneath the cold exterior. "Stronger together," she said. And in the heart of the northern castle, surrounded by ancient stone, whispers of magic, and the light of a rising sun, a new chapter began. One of hope, courage, and redemption. One where fear had been faced, darkness had been challenged, and love, unexpected, unbreakable, had found a home. The House of Shadows had given them its trials, but it had also given them each other, and that, above all, was the greatest victory of all.